is a penny more than 3.2. So I want you to chant with me so they hear it in there. 3.2 just won't do. 3.2.
Healthcare and social services were front and center at the Capitol this past week. The House budget proposal leaves a $6 billion shortfall for Medicaid. Advocates still hold out hope that lawmakers will tap into the rainy day fund. It's more likely in the Senate, but in the House, the required 100 votes will be tough to get. To bring you an inside look at what's happening at the state capitol this week, we turn to our On Politics panel for this Sunday. State Representative Donna Howard is a Democrat from here in Austin. She's the vice chairwoman of the House Administration Committee. She's also a nurse. State Representative Doug Miller is a Republican from New Braunfels. He sits on the Appropriations Committee. And Emily Ramshaw is the Assistant Managing Editor and covers social services for the Texas Tribune. Welcome to you all. Glad you came in. I want to start with a question from one of our viewers who emailed it in. The Senate's new plan adds $4.5 billion to the health care and social services budget, but it cuts out certain services by doing that, like the low-income program for HIV meds. But are people forgetting the House budget plans to cut a lot more money? I know you're not forgetting it.
Oh, absolutely not. You know, I'm really glad that the Senate is actually finding some money to put back in. But even with what they're saying right now, it's probably only going to reduce the deficit by half, if that much. So we're still talking about a tremendous amount of reduction in funds that are going to have a huge impact on Texas citizens.
Doug?
Well, that's very true. In fact, we voted out in the Appropriations Committee HB 1 to head to the floor, and with that, we proposed right at $23 billion worth of cuts, which puts us at where we think we need to be after about 6 weeks worth of work. These are tough economic times, and I think that even though most Texans realize that, people certainly want to advocate for their own issues, and I think that's fine, because when we take it to the floor, we'll hear a lot of debate about things that are important to specific districts and specific representation.
Emily, you're up there every day covering this.
Well, what's going to be fascinating is really watching to see where the House and the Senate come down on this. I mean, right now it looks like there may be a little more flexibility, wiggle room financially in the Senate version. House Appropriations Chair Jim Pitts has said, look, I cannot see our House passing a budget that has sort of as many financial options as the Senate bill, so I think it's going to be interesting to see where everybody ends up.
Mr. Miller, do you hear talk in your caucus about reviving support to raise taxes?
No, not at all. I mean, it's almost, I would say it's virtually nil, because that's the message that we believe we heard back in November. And by going through and having these cuts, we've done what we think are appropriate measures to control the budget. Now, tough, yes. Are there going to be some situations that probably need some more tweaking? Yes, but taxes, no.
What's the Democrats say about that?
Well, certainly I think we're looking at it as a revenue shortfall, and the fact is that we don't have sufficient revenue to provide basic services, and I think we're all hearing now from folks back home who are letting us know how this is impacting their schools, how this is impacting all kinds of things that are going to be happening in their communities. And the fact is, if you read the paper this morning, you see all the school districts in our local area that are cutting teachers and cutting other staff. Right now, that's happening all over our state. And the fact is, we simply don't have enough revenue coming in to provide for the basic services of this state.
Seems like the Senate Finance Subcommittee made some progress on Medicaid funding, restoring some funding to nursing homes and other programs.
That's true, but we're still generally looking at across the board 10% provider rate cuts in the Medicaid program, higher than 30% cuts in rates in nursing homes. So I think the reality is lawmakers are looking for all kinds of ways to find savings in the Medicaid program, but the reality is they're not going to be able to find some of these payment reform options probably for years down the road. So it's a bind for sure.
One senator suggested this week that legislators are deciding on who lives and who dies. Do you think that's so overdramatic?
I think that's a little dramatic. I think that Dr. Zerwas, who's headed up our subcommittee on this, is, certainly the fact that he's a physician has given him great insight into this. He said the other day that 20% of the consumers in the Medicaid arena are using about 80% of the funds, and I think that what we'll look at, and as we go through, and obviously this is going to wind up in a conference committee between the Senate and the House. I think that we'll work together to make sure that won't happen.
You were a nurse at one time at Brackenridge. You were shaking your head.
Well, I've heard the statistics too about 20% of Medicare. That the vast majority of those services that are being delivered, 80% of them are going to only 20% of the population. The fact is we have an aging population that lives longer, we have a lot of chronic diseases, and it's very costly. I am very concerned about the reduction in funds, and Emily was talking about the Medicaid situation. The fact is that if we don't reimburse at a high enough rate, we're already losing providers. It's going to only get worse at the very time that we're going to have more people seeking services. We're also cutting funding for the nursing education pipeline, for physician education. Again, cutting off the pipeline that's going to produce the very providers that we need. So I am very concerned about what's happening here.
Emily?
I would add that there are, lawmakers are looking at a lot of possible inefficiencies in the Medicaid program. I would say there are absolutely rooms to sort of trim and find savings and make sure we're not overusing our services. But I think at the same time, Texas is already a state where Medicaid services are very slim compared to other states. And, depending on what happens with federal health care reform, as we see potentially, 1 million more people coming onto Medicaid rolls, we clearly could face a crisis.
As legislators, do you all prioritize things? I mean, there's a lot of talk about education. We know about all the cuts statewide, but shouldn't health and human services come first?
Well, I'll be glad to go there. Absolutely. I don't think that there's a distinction there. Certainly health and human services, education, and then we walk on down the line to services that are provided by the state. And I don't think there's a question in anyone's mind, at least as I do, talking about our caucus, about Republicans, that we want to take care of Texans. It's just how to do that in the most effective and efficient and proficient way. And that's the debate. And so as we work through these issues and try to develop cuts, as Emily said, I think we're going to come out with a product in the end that will take care of most of the situations that we have.
Well, I think it's kind of a Sophie's choice, Solomon, whatever metaphor you want to use here. The fact is that, obviously health and human services are critical. We have to have our population healthy and well. But we have to educate our population. We're not going to have the workforce that we need for creating the jobs that we need to keep our economy moving forward if we don't invest in public education and higher education.
Thank you all for being here. Good luck in trying to solve these problems for us. We appreciate all your efforts. And Session 11 will be back with more right after this.